Under the burning gold of the late afternoon sun, the small town of Willow Creek seemed to stand still, wrapped in the quiet hum of wind and dust. The place hadn't changed much in 20 years. Wooden storefronts faded gray, horses tied to hitching rails outside the saloon, and a handful of folks moving slow, as if the heat weighed on their bones. It was the kind of town that sat between nowhere and forever, where secrets had more room to breathe than people did. That was the day he rode in. The rancher folks barely knew, but everyone had heard about. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a quietness that made even the restless stop talking when he passed. He wasn't one for words, but his eyes told stories. Some said he'd been a soldier once. Others whispered he was running from something worse. Out on the edge of town, he had a spread big enough to lose a man in. Yet he lived alone, except for his horses and that old dog that followed him like a shadow. The rancher didn't like trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him all the same. That evening, as the light thinned over the plains and the sky turned a bruised purple, he was fixing the old barn door when he heard the sound, soft, shaky, not far away. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the scrape of metal. It was a voice. A woman's. He froze, hammer in midair. "Please." The voice trembled. "Don't let them find me." He turned toward the sound, scanning the yard. The dust hung thick, glowing in the fading light. Then he saw her, barefoot, her dress torn, her hair tangled with bits of straw. She looked like she'd run miles. He dropped the hammer and went to her slowly, careful not to spook her. "Easy there," he said, his voice low, steady. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here." She backed up a step, clutching the edge of the barn wall as if it could hold her up. "You don't understand," she said. "If they catch me, they'll kill me." There was a pause, a long, thick silence broken only by the groan of the wind through the fence posts. He didn't ask who they were, not yet. He just motioned her toward the barn. "Get inside," he said quietly. "You can rest there." She hesitated but followed. Inside, the air smelled of hay and rain-soaked earth. The light from a single lantern threw shadows against the rough boards. The rancher could see now that her hands were scraped raw, and one ankle was swelling beneath the dust. She was trying hard not to cry. He fetched a bucket of water, a clean rag, and knelt beside her. "You can wash up," he said. "Ain't much, but it's clean." She looked at him, uncertain. "You shouldn't help me," she whispered. "If they come and find me here," he interrupted gently, "then they'll have to deal with me." For a moment, she just stared at him, studying the lines on his face, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke. Then, quietly, she nodded. As she dipped the rag into the water and began to clean the dirt from her arms, he turned away to give her some privacy. He kept his eyes on the barn door, his hand resting near the hammer on the workbench. Somewhere out there, he could hear distant hooves. Someone was looking for her. The rancher didn't ask her name until later, when the sky outside had turned black and the crickets started their slow, steady song. "You got anyone I can send word to?" he asked. Her voice was small. "No one." He waited, then said, "You from town?" She shook her head. "I worked for the Whitlock place." "Out near the ridge," he frowned. "That's a long way to run." "What happened?" Her hands trembled. The lantern light flickered over her face, catching the fear she tried to hide. "They made me do things. Things I didn't want to. When I said no, they locked me in the cellar. I got out when one of them was drunk and left the latch loose." The rancher's chest tightened. He'd heard stories about the Whitlocks, about their cruel foreman and his sons who ran the workers like cattle. But hearing it in her voice made it different. Real. She looked down at her hands. "He told me to strip, and then..." Her voice broke. She didn't finish the sentence. The rancher stood there silent. The air between them seemed to thicken with something heavy, something unspoken. He felt the blood rise in him, slow and burning. "Enough," he said quietly. "You don't have to say more." But the words lingered, cutting through the quiet like a blade. He turned toward the wall, gripping the edge of the workbench until his knuckles went white. Outside, the wind kicked up again, sending the barn door creaking on its hinges. "You're safe here," he said after a moment, his voice low. "I'll see to it," she nodded weakly. "You don't know them. They'll come." He met her eyes. "Let 'em." They stayed like that for a long time, the only sound the faint rustle of hay and the steady breath of the horses. Somewhere in the dark, the dog barked once, sharp and warning. The rancher moved to the window slit and looked out. A lantern bobbed in the distance. Riders, 2 of them, maybe 3, moving slow down the road. His gut tightened. He turned back to her. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." She reached out suddenly, grabbing his hand. Please don't go out there. If they see you, I've handled worse, he said, pulling free gently. But his voice wasn't as steady as before. He stepped out into the yard, the night air cool against his skin. The moon had climbed high, painting the land silver and sharp. He could see them now. 3 riders coming up the fence line, their horses snorting in the dark. The lead man carried a rifle across his saddle. The rancher's heart beat slow and heavy. He wasn't a man who liked violence, but sometimes it didn't leave you a choice. He reached for the old board that leaned against the barn door, a piece of oak he'd meant to fix the roof with. It wasn't much, but it'd do. Inside, the woman watched through a crack in the wood, her breath catching in her throat. She saw the men stop at the edge of the yard, whispering among themselves. Then one of them called out, "We're looking for someone. You seen a girl come through here? Dark hair, about so tall?" The rancher didn't answer right away. He took one slow step forward, letting the moonlight fall across his face. "Ain't seen anyone," he said finally. "You ought to turn back. Ain't safe to be roaming at this hour." The man on the horse laughed. "That right? Or you hiding something in that barn?" The rancher didn't move. "Just my horses." The man leaned in his saddle. "Mind if we take a look?" The rancher's jaw tightened. "I do mind." A silence followed, a dangerous kind. The kind that could tip either way with one wrong breath. Then the man swung down from his horse. "Step aside," he said. The rancher didn't. For a moment, time hung still. The wind, the night, the tension coiled tight between them. Then the man reached for his rifle. The rancher moved first. The board came up in one swift motion, cracking against the man's arm. The rifle fell. The second rider shouted, his horse rearing. Dust exploded under the hooves. Inside the barn, the woman gasped. The rancher raised the board again, his breath ragged, but then something shifted. The light from the lantern flickered across the ground, and in that split second, he saw something that made him freeze. The board slipped from his hands and hit the dirt with a dull thud. He stared, his face pale beneath the brim of his hat. The man in front of him had dropped his rifle. But the moonlight caught something gleaming just above his heart, a small silver badge pinned to his vest. Sheriff. And behind him, one of the other riders shouted, "She's wanted for murder, you fool!"
"Step aside!"
The rancher didn't move. The wind howled through the yard, carrying the sound of the board as it rolled slowly to a stop in the dirt. And for the first time that night, he realized he might have just chosen the wrong side. The rancher stood frozen under the pale wash of moonlight, staring at the badge that glimmered on the man's chest. His heartbeat drummed in his ears, slow but heavy. Sheriff. He hadn't expected that. Not in this quiet corner of the plains. Not at this hour. The sheriff's hand went to his shoulder, rubbing the place where the board had struck him. "You've got a mean swing for a man who claims he ain't hiding anything," he said, his voice rough but measured. The other 2 men stayed on their horses, eyes scanning the shadows that stretched around the barn. The rancher lowered his hand slowly, his mind working to catch up with what had just happened. "Didn't know who you were," he said at last. "You came in the dark, rifles drawn. Don't blame me for being cautious." The sheriff gave a small nod but didn't take his eyes off him. "Fair enough. But I'll be straight with you. We're looking for a fugitive, a woman. She ran from the Whitlock place earlier today. There's a dead man in that house now, and she's the only one missing." The rancher felt a jolt run through him. He glanced toward the barn, but just for a heartbeat, just long enough for the sheriff to notice. The sheriff's brow furrowed. "You sure you ain't seen her?" The rancher didn't answer right away. The night pressed close, thick with silence. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its cry thin and haunting across the hills. "She came through here," the rancher said finally. "Looked half dead. I gave her water. That's all." The sheriff studied him, then looked toward the barn. "Is she still here?" The rancher's hand twitched at his side. "No, she took off before sundown. Headed west near the ridge." The sheriff held his gaze a moment longer. Then, without a word, he turned to his men. "Check the barn anyway." One of them dismounted and started toward the door. The rancher stepped forward, but the sheriff's hand came up, firm. "Stand aside, son." The rancher hesitated, his pulse quickening. Inside, he knew she was still there, hidden somewhere in the shadows behind the haystack or maybe under the feed table. He could almost feel her fear through the walls. The deputy pushed the barn door open. The hinges moaned. Lantern light spilled across the hay-strewn floor, over the tools, over the horse stall. And for a long, breathless moment there was nothing. Then the deputy turned back. "Ain't no one here, Sheriff." "Just animals." The rancher's shoulders eased slightly. The sheriff gave him one last hard look, then nodded to his men. "Mount up. We'll check the ridge." They turned their horses, the sound of hooves fading slowly into the open night. Only when they were gone did the rancher let out the breath he'd been holding. He waited until the dust settled before going back into the barn. Inside, she was crouched in the far corner, wrapped in shadow. Her eyes were wide and she was shaking. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "You don't understand. Then help me," he said quietly. "Tell me what really happened." She swallowed hard, her fingers clutching the hem of her torn sleeve. For a long time, she didn't speak. When she did, her voice was thin as thread. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I didn't mean to kill him." The words hung there between them, heavy and raw. The rancher crouched down, trying to meet her eyes. "Start from the beginning." She looked past him as if staring into some memory she wished she could forget. "I worked for the Whitlocks for almost a year. The pay was poor, but it was better than starving. I cooked, cleaned, and did what I was told. But their foreman, he was cruel. Not just to me, to everyone. He drank hard, carried a whip, and the family let him do as he pleased. Said he kept the workers in line." The rancher listened, his jaw tight. He'd heard rumors, but no one ever spoke of it plain. "One night," she went on, her voice trembling, "he told me to bring him supper to the barn. I did, but when I turned to leave, he locked the door. Said I wasn't going anywhere until I did what he wanted. I begged him to stop, but he laughed. I reached for the nearest thing I could find, a pitchfork. I didn't even think. I just swung." Her hands covered her face, her breath catching between words. "He fell. I thought he'd get up, but he didn't. When I saw the blood..." She stopped, unable to finish. The rancher was silent. Outside, the night seemed to stretch farther than ever. "They'll never believe me," she whispered. "They'll hang me for it." He leaned back against the post, staring at the dirt floor. "Maybe, or maybe there's more to this than you're saying." She looked up sharply. "You think I'm lying?" "I think you're scared," he said. "And I think scared people sometimes leave parts out." Her lips pressed tight, but she didn't answer. After a long silence, he stood and pulled an old blanket from a shelf, tossing it to her. "Get some rest. You can stay till morning, but you'll have to move on after that. If the sheriff comes back and finds you here, there won't be any talking our way out." She caught the blanket but didn't thank him, just watched him with wide, guarded eyes. He blew out the lantern, leaving only a sliver of moonlight spilling through the gaps in the boards. He could hear her breathing in the dark, slow, uneven, restless. He lay down on the other side of the barn near the door, his revolver resting beside him. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound, the creak of the timbers, the shuffle of hooves kept him half awake. His mind wouldn't quiet. He'd seen men do desperate things before. He'd done a few himself back in the war. But something about her story didn't sit right. Just before dawn, he got up and stepped outside. The air was cold and clear, carrying the faint scent of sage. The eastern sky was soft pink at the edges, and the land stretched out wide and empty as a promise. He poured water from the pump into a tin cup, thinking, the sheriff wouldn't give up easy, not over a killing like that. And if she really had done it, she was right. Justice around these parts wasn't kind to women, especially not ones with no family to speak for them. When he went back inside, she was awake, sitting against the haystack with the blanket around her shoulders. "You're leaving today," he said quietly. She nodded. "I'll head toward the river. Maybe catch a train east if I can." He studied her a long moment. "You got money for that?" She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. I'll find a way," he sighed. "There's an old trail that runs behind the ridge. Not many folks know it anymore. If you stick to that, you'll stay off the main road." She looked at him, something softening in her expression. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Because I know what it's like to be blamed for something you can't take back." She seemed to understand that. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something that didn't need words. Then, faintly, from the distance, came the sound of hooves again. The rancher stiffened. He moved to the window slit and peered out. Dust was rising from the road. The sheriff was back, and this time there were more riders with him. She saw the look on his face and went pale. "They found me," she whispered. He turned to her. "There's a trap door under the stall," he said quickly. "It leads to the root cellar. Go." She hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll keep them talking." She started to protest, but he cut her off with a look. "Go now." She disappeared into the shadows as the pounding of hooves grew louder. The rancher took a slow breath and stepped outside, squinting into the morning sun as the sheriff and his men rode up. The sheriff dismounted, his face set hard. "Morning," he said flatly. "You didn't tell me everything last night, did you?" The rancher kept his voice calm. "I told you she came through." "I wasn't lying." The sheriff looked past him toward the barn. "Mind if we look again?" He shrugged. "Be my guest." They spread out, checking the barn, the stalls, the shed. The rancher stood still, heart pounding in his chest. He could hear their boots on the wooden floor, hear the scrape of metal against wood. Every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, the sheriff came out, shaking his head. "Nothing. But she's close. I can feel it." He turned his gaze on the rancher, eyes narrowing. "You'd tell me if you were hiding her, wouldn't you?" The rancher met his stare. "If I knew where she was, I'd tell you." It was almost true. The sheriff studied him a moment longer, then mounted up again. "We'll sweep the river next. If she comes back here, you send word. Understand?" The rancher nodded once. When they were gone, he went back inside and lifted the trap door. The woman was crouched below, pale and silent. "They're heading to the river," he said. "You've got a few hours' start if you go north." She climbed up slowly, blinking at the light. "You're risking everything for me." He looked away. "Maybe it's worth it." She stared at him for a long time, then said softly, "If they find me, they'll hang me. But if they don't, I'll come back." He didn't answer. The sun was climbing higher now, and the land outside was glowing gold. Somewhere out there, the sheriff's men were riding, the dust of their trail curling like smoke in the air. She pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders and slipped out the back of the barn, disappearing into the tall grass. The rancher stood there a while longer, staring after her. He didn't know if she was guilty or not, but deep down, something told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as the wind whispered across the open plain, he knew the next time he saw her, the truth might be far worse than anything he'd imagined. The rancher didn't move for a long while after she disappeared into the grass. He just stood there, hat in hand, watching the horizon where the land met the pale blue morning sky. The wind had picked up, stirring the dry stalks and carrying the faint sound of her footsteps until even that faded. He knew she wouldn't get far without food or water, but he also knew she'd never stop running. Folks like her didn't have anywhere to go, only places to hide. When he finally turned back toward the barn, something in him felt heavier. The sheriff's words echoed in his mind. A dead man, a missing woman, and a truth caught somewhere between them. He'd been through enough to know that the truth was never simple. Out here, it was usually buried deep, sometimes under pride, sometimes under blood. He spent the rest of the morning fixing the fence line, though his hands worked slower than usual. The sun climbed higher, sharp and hot, and the air shimmered above the fields. The old dog followed him, ears twitching at every sound. Around noon, a wagon passed along the road in the distance. He didn't wave. Folks around Willow Creek had long memories, and he'd learned to keep to himself. By afternoon, a cloud of dust rose from the direction of town. He squinted, setting down his tools. A single rider this time, moving fast. As the horse drew closer, he recognized the bay mare. It was Tom Grady. The blacksmith's boy, maybe 19 and too young to hide the worry on his face. "Sheriff sent me," Tom said breathlessly when he stopped at the gate. "They found something near the river." The rancher wiped his hands on his jeans. "What kind of something?" Tom hesitated. "A saddlebag, with blood on it. Sheriff says it might belong to the girl." The rancher's stomach turned cold. "Where?" "Down by the willow crossing. He's got men combing the banks." The rancher nodded slowly. "All right. Thanks for letting me know." Tom shifted in the saddle. "Sheriff told me to ask if you'd seen anything strange. Said he still don't trust that story you gave him last night." The rancher's eyes met the boy's, steady but tired. "You tell him I've seen nothing but dust and sweat since dawn." Tom nodded uncertainly, then turned his horse and rode off, kicking up another trail of dust. The rancher stood there a long while after he was gone. The willow crossing was 6 miles north, far enough that she could have made it there if she'd left before sunrise. But if the sheriff's men found blood... He walked back to the barn, the unease growing stronger with each step. Something didn't fit. If she'd killed a man and fled, why take a saddlebag? Why head toward the river, where every lawman in 3 counties would be searching? That night, the sky rolled over thick with clouds and the air smelled like rain. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Around dusk, while he was feeding the horses, he heard a soft crunch outside. boots in the dirt. He turned fast, hand on his revolver, but it wasn't the sheriff. It was a different figure, slimmer, quieter. She stepped into the lamplight, soaked from head to toe, her hair plastered against her face. They were close, she whispered. I couldn't go north. I doubled back. He didn't speak for a moment. She looked different now, tired, desperate, the dirt streaked on her cheek. You shouldn't have come back, he said. They'll search here again. I didn't have a choice, she said. The river's flooded. There's no crossing. They've got men posted on both sides. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You're making this harder for both of us. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I know, but I can't keep running. I just need one night just to rest. He stared at her, then finally nodded. All right. But if the sheriff shows up, I can't stop him twice. She gave a faint nod. I wouldn't ask you to. He led her inside, back to the same corner she'd hidden in before. She sank down on the hay, shivering. He handed her a piece of bread and a tin of water. She ate slowly, eyes unfocused like someone whose thoughts were miles away. After a while, he asked quietly, You said you worked for the Whitlocks. Who else lived there? Mr. Whitlock and his wife. Their foreman, Lyle. 2 hands, both of them drunk most of the time, and a man named Pierce. He wasn't from around here. Said he was a friend of Mr. Whitlock's, but I don't think that's true. What makes you say that? She hesitated. He was different. Always watching. Kept a notebook, wrote things down. I think he was looking for something. Money maybe. Land papers. I once saw him arguing with the foreman in the barn, shouting about debts and names I didn't know. The rancher frowned. And he's the one who's dead? She shook her head. No, it was Lyle, the foreman. The name hit him like a strike of lightning. He knew Lyle, had known him for years. They weren't friends, but they'd shared whiskey once or twice at the saloon. Lyle wasn't the kind of man you'd mourn easily, but he was dangerous enough that no one tangled with him. The rancher looked down at the dirt, his mind racing. Then why's the sheriff saying Pierce is dead? She looked up sharply. He said that? He nodded. That's what the boy told me this morning. Her face went pale. That's not possible. Pierce was alive when I ran. He was standing by the gate yelling for someone to catch me. The rancher's thoughts churned. 2 men, one dead, one missing, and a woman who couldn't tell who was chasing her anymore. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, and rain began to patter on the roof. He moved closer to the barn door, watching the storm gather over the horizon. The smell of wet earth filled the air. You're telling me, he said slowly, that whoever's dead at the Whitlock place might not be who the sheriff thinks it is. She nodded weakly. And if he finds out, he'll think I lied. He'll never stop hunting me. The wind howled, shaking the loose boards. The rancher turned back to her. Then we need to find out what really happened. Her eyes widened. You'd do that for me? I'm not doing it for you, he said. I just don't like being lied to. That night, neither of them slept much. When dawn broke, the rain had stopped, and a low fog rolled across the pastures. The rancher saddled his horse, tying his coat tight around his shoulders. She watched him from the doorway, clutching the blanket he'd given her. Where are you going? She asked. To Whitlock's, he said simply. If there's a truth to be found, it'll be there. You can't, she said, stepping forward. They'll see you. He gave her a small, grim smile. I've been seen before. The ride to the Whitlock ranch took him most of the morning. The road was slick with mud, and the sky hung low and gray. When he crested the last hill, he saw smoke rising from the chimneys and 2 riders patrolling the fence line. The place looked quieter than it should have been. He stopped just short of the gate, watching. The sheriff's men were there, at least 4 of them, and in the yard stood a wagon covered with a tarp. He caught a glimpse of boots sticking out from beneath it. Whoever was under there wasn't breathing anymore. He turned his horse off the main road and rode through the trees, circling behind the barn. The back door was open, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rot and something metallic. Blood. He crouched low, moving through the shadows. There, near the haystack, he saw the stain on the floorboards, the same spot she must have struck the man. But something didn't add up. The mark was old, darker than it should have been if it were from last night. Then he saw it, a glint of metal half buried in the hay. He reached for it and pulled it free, a small badge. Not the sheriff's kind, but an investigator's, with the letters PW etched faintly across it. Pierce Whitlock. He froze. So the dead man wasn't the foreman at all. It was Pierce, the man who'd been asking questions, writing things down, the one she swore had been alive when she fled. He slipped the badge into his pocket and turned to leave, but stopped when he heard voices outside. 2 men were coming around the barn. He recognized one, Sheriff Maddox. "Place is cleaned up," the sheriff was saying, "but we'll keep the story simple. Foreman gone mad, girl ran off, case closed." The other man spoke quietly. "And if someone finds out the truth?" "Then they'll end up like Pierce," Maddox said. The rancher's blood went cold. He backed away silently, slipping out through the rear door and into the trees. By the time he reached his horse, the wind had picked up again, carrying the first bite of another storm. He mounted quickly, urging the animal toward home. The girl was waiting by the fence when he returned, worry etched deep in her face. "Well?" she asked. He pulled the badge from his pocket and handed it to her. "Pierce is dead," he said. "Sheriff's covering it up. Whatever he was digging into, it got him killed." She stared at the badge, trembling. "Then I didn't kill anyone." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but someone wants the town to think you did." The wind whipped through the yard, rattling the loose gate. The dog barked once and fell silent. The rancher looked out toward the horizon where dark clouds gathered again. "This ain't over," he said quietly. "Not by a long shot." And as lightning split the sky, he realized just how deep this lie went, and how dangerous the truth might be once it finally came to light. The storm that had been rumbling on the horizon finally broke in full fury, rain lashing across the plains like icy needles. The rancher's coat clung to him, heavy and wet, as he led his horse across the muddied pasture. The girl rode behind him, silent, her blanket wrapped tightly, eyes darting at every shadow. Even the dog had stayed close, its ears flat against its head as the wind whistled through the trees. They didn't speak much. Words were useless when danger was only a heartbeat away. The rancher's mind was a storm of its own. Sheriff Maddox had lied, and now Pierce Whitlock was dead. Someone was orchestrating this, making sure the blame fell on her. And if she stayed in Willow Creek much longer, they would find her. He had to get her out, but even the safest trails felt exposed in the rain, slick with mud and hidden tracks. By mid-afternoon, they reached the ridge the rancher had mentioned earlier. From here, the valley stretched below, dotted with small groves of cottonwoods and the meandering line of the river. He dismounted, scanning the foggy distance. The sheriff's men weren't visible yet, but he knew they could be anywhere. Maddox was smart. He didn't rush blindly. "Stay close," he said, gesturing for her to dismount. "If we split up, you run straight. Don't stop for anything." She nodded, biting her lip, eyes wide with fear. "You're not coming with me?" He hesitated. "I'm coming just far enough to make sure you cross the river safely." After that, she didn't question him. There wasn't time for questions. The path down the ridge was slick with rain, winding through tall grass and loose rocks. The rancher led, careful not to make noise. Every step could be the difference between getting away and getting caught. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, too close to be random. Maddox's men were out there somewhere in the fog. They moved in silence until the river came into view, swollen from the rain. The current was faster than usual, whitecaps breaking against the banks. The rancher's brow furrowed. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. "We'll have to find the ford further upstream," she shivered. "I can't swim. You won't have to," he said. "We'll get you across shallow enough to keep your feet on the bottom." As they pressed on, he saw footprints in the mud, fresh. Someone had been there recently. His stomach tightened. Not Maddox yet. These tracks were lighter, more deliberate, moving along the riverbank. He motioned for her to stay low as they approached. Then a voice called out, sharp and calm. "Thought you could hide from me?" The rancher froze. They weren't alone. Out of the fog stepped a man he hadn't expected. Pierce Whitlock's second in command. A wiry, mean-looking fellow named Jeb. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, but his eyes were deadly. "Step aside," Jeb said. "You've caused enough trouble," the girl gasped, clutching the rancher's arm. He wants me back." The rancher stepped in front of her. "Not today," Jeb laughed, low and bitter. "You think you can stop me? You're just one man, and she's the one they want." "Then you're wasting your time," the rancher said, hand moving toward his revolver. Jeb's eyes flicked to the weapon, then back to him. "You've got guts," he said. "I'll give you that. But guts don't mean much when the law's on my side." The rancher stiffened. Maddox. He must have been following them. Watching. That meant the sheriff's men could appear any second. "Keep her quiet," Jeb hissed, moving closer. I'll deal with you first, the rancher tensed. If he fired, it would bring Maddox and his men down on both of them. If he didn't, well, they both could end up captured. The girl pressed closer, whispering, I can't go back. Please, he nodded once. I know. The rain hammered down harder, turning the ground to slippery mud. The river roared beside them, the sound almost drowning out their own breathing. Jeb lunged, suddenly swinging the rifle like a club. The rancher ducked and struck him with the butt of his revolver, sending the man sprawling backward. Run! He shouted to the girl. She hesitated, but he shoved her forward. She stumbled down the muddy slope toward the river, gripping a branch for balance. He turned to face Jeb again, but the man was already on his feet, fury blazing in his eyes. Then came the sound of hooves, fast, heavy, cutting through the storm. Maddox and 2 of his deputies appeared from the fog, eyes narrowed, guns drawn. Drop it! Maddox barked. The rancher froze. Jeb's face twisted into a grimace, realizing he was surrounded. This ain't over, he shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the storm. The girl made it to the river's edge and waded carefully into the cold, rushing water. Her heart pounded, and she stumbled more than once, but she kept moving, trusting the rancher's instructions. The current tugged at her skirt and blanket, threatening to sweep her away. The rancher stayed back, keeping Jeb between himself and Maddox's men. His pulse was steady, controlled, but every nerve in his body screamed. He couldn't lose her now, not after everything. Jeb shifted, raising his rifle again. This ends tonight, he snarled. You don't get to decide that, the rancher said, his voice firm. A lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the scene. Maddox's men flinched, the river glinting behind them, the girl barely keeping her footing. The rancher lunged forward, striking Jeb again. The rifle clattered to the ground. Maddox's deputies moved in, but the rancher didn't stop. His fists were all he had now, measured, controlled, every strike sending Jeb staggering. From the river, the girl called out, her voice trembling but determined. Hurry! The rancher glanced back, heart hammering. She was almost across. The water reached her waist now, the current stronger. One misstep and the whole plan would fail. A shout came from the fog. Maddox. Stop fighting or I'll shoot. The rancher froze. Every second mattered. He had to hold Jeb long enough for her to reach the other side. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief blinding light, he saw something that made him hesitate. Pierce Whitlock, or at least someone dressed like him, stepping out of the shadows near the barn. His pulse jumped. Was it a trick? A body double? Or had Pierce somehow survived? Jeb's grip on his anger tightened, and he lunged at the rancher with a knife he had drawn from his belt. The rancher twisted just in time, feeling the cold steel brush against his side. Pain flared, but he didn't let go. From the river came another cry, this time closer. The girl stumbled onto the bank, soaked and shivering, but she was safe. The rancher took a deep breath, eyeing Jeb, the shadowy figure near the barn, and the approaching deputies. Maddox was moving carefully now, hands on his revolver, eyes calculating. Every movement could trigger gunfire. Every word could ignite violence. Thunder rolled overhead, masking the sound of Jeb's next move. The man's rage was palpable, his every muscle coiled for an attack. The rancher squared his shoulders, ready for what had to come. The girl, safe on the far bank, looked back at him, fear and hope mingling in her eyes. He nodded, silently telling her to stay put. Then the shadowed figure near the barn stepped into the open fully, and lightning struck again, illuminating a face the rancher hadn't expected to see. A face that made every instinct in him scream. Pierce Whitlock. Alive. And smiling. The storm intensified. Rain lashing like knives, the river churning violently. Maddox's deputies froze, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Jeb snarled, knife still raised, eyes locked on the rancher. The girl's breath came in short, trembling gasps. The rancher's mind raced. Pierce was alive. Maddox's men were near. Jeb was still dangerous, and the river was a threat to anyone who stepped wrong. Every choice now could mean death, capture or disaster. And in that moment, with the sky split by lightning, the river raging and the storm pounding down, it became clear. The truth, the lies, and the danger had all converged. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. The rancher tightened his grip on his revolver, eyes flicking from Pierce to Jeb, from the girl to the river. Every heartbeat was a drum, every breath a countdown. Outside, the wind screamed through the trees. the storm's fury making the night itself seem alive. And somewhere in the distance the sound of Maddox's voice carried, sharp and threatening. "End it now or we'll take everyone down." The rancher's jaw tightened. He knew this was the point of no return. The final moves were about to play out, and the outcome would be decided in the next few breaths. Lightning struck again, blinding, violent, and the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, everything froze. The lightning faded, leaving the night damp and quiet, broken only by the rush of the swollen river and the distant rumble of thunder retreating over the plains. The rancher's hand tightened around his revolver, knuckles white, every nerve taut. He and Jeb stared at each other, breathing heavy, while the girl crouched on the far bank, drenched, shivering, but safe. Pierce Whitlock's figure lingered near the barn, eyes glinting in the shadows, calm and unnervingly confident. Maddox's men waited uncertainly, tension coiling in the space between all of them. The rancher realized first that he had to act, and not with fists or gunfire. He lowered the revolver slightly, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Enough," he said, voice carrying across the storm-lashed field. "It ends tonight one way or another. Not with more blood, not with more lies." Pierce's laugh cut through the night, dry and sharp. "Blood and lies? That's what this town is built on, rancher. You think you can change it? You're just another fool trying to play sheriff in someone else's game." Jeb shifted behind him, uneasy. Even he felt the tension now, realizing the storm wasn't just outside. It was everywhere, swirling around them, threatening to break all at once. The rancher took another step forward.
"We all know what's been done."
"Pierce, you killed Lyle. You tried to frame her for it. Maddox, you've been chasing shadows and taking shortcuts, and now everyone here is at risk. But it doesn't have to end in more deaths." Pierce tilted his head, watching the rancher with calculating eyes. "And what would you do, huh? Take me down? Shoot me in the mud?" "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of luck." The rancher didn't flinch. "I don't need to take you down. Not tonight." He glanced at the girl. "She's done running. You all need to see the truth, and it's time everyone stopped pretending." The girl stepped forward from the riverbank, trembling but resolute. "He's telling the truth," she said firmly. "I didn't kill anyone, Pierce. He tried to make me, tried to pin it all on me. Lyle. He's the one who died, but Pierce made it look like I did it. That's why I ran." Maddox's eyes narrowed and he raised his hand as if to speak, but the rancher held up a hand. "Listen first." Pierce set it all up. He wanted the Whitlock estate, the land and control over the workers. He used lies and fear to make everyone follow his plan. "The girl, she's innocent." Pierce's face darkened. "You think you can convince them with your words? These people know who holds the gun and who controls the story." The rancher stepped closer, unwavering. "Not anymore. The truth matters more than fear tonight." He pointed at the badge he still held from Pierce, the proof that he was a manipulator, a liar, and a killer. "This proves who's been playing everyone. The girl didn't do it. Pierce did. End of story." A silence fell over the yard. Maddox's men glanced at each other, unsure whether to advance, pull their weapons, or wait. The storm had passed, but tension still rippled in the wet air, thick and electric. Finally, Maddox lowered his hand. "You've got proof," he muttered. "I'll need to see it. To believe it. But if this checks out, Pierce Whitlock..." His voice trailed off, sharp anger in his tone, the weight of the law heavy on him now. Pierce stepped forward, but there was no bravado left. He saw the resolve in the rancher's eyes, the honesty in the girl's stance, and the quiet judgment of Maddox's men. For the first time, fear touched him. "This isn't over," he said, voice low. "You'll pay for what you've done." The rancher shook his head. "Not tonight. Tonight it ends. Justice will follow its course, but not with more blood spilled here and now." The girl, her voice small but steady, added, "He saved me. He believed me when everyone else wanted me gone, and I owe him that much." She looked at the rancher, a quiet gratitude in her eyes. Maddox's men moved to secure Pierce, restraining him without violence. The storm-soaked ground held the tension like a mirror, reflecting every fear, every lie, every secret that had led to this moment. The rancher guided the girl back toward the barn, keeping one eye on Maddox and the others. "You're safe for now," he said softly. "But you'll have to leave town, keep moving until everything cools down." She nodded. "I will, but I'll remember this. Everything you've done." He allowed himself a faint smile, though the night had left him weary. "Just take care of yourself. That's all I ask." As dawn broke, the rain-soaked landscape glimmered under a pale sun. The barn, the river, and the ridge all seemed washed clean, as if the storm had swept away more than just the mud. It had cleared the path for truth to surface, for justice to begin. Maddox, now more composed, addressed the rancher quietly. "I owe you an explanation. And a thank you. You handled what I should have handled long ago. Pierce's games. I didn't see them for what they were, but now they're done. Thanks to you." The rancher nodded, tipping his hat. "Just doing what's right. Don't make the mistake of thinking it's easy, Sheriff. Truth. It always comes with a price." The girl, standing nearby, finally allowed herself a small laugh, shaky but genuine. "I thought I'd never see daylight without someone trying to hang me. But here I am, and I owe you more than I can say." "You don't owe me," he replied. "You survived. That's all that matters." For the first time since the storm began, there was a sense of calm. The tension that had coiled in the night loosened slightly, and even the wind seemed gentler, carrying the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. In the days that followed, word spread through Willow Creek about the truth behind Pierce Whitlock's schemes. The townsfolk whispered of the rancher who had stood up against the lies, of the girl who had survived impossible odds, and of a sheriff who learned the weight of justice. Pierce was taken into custody, and the Whitlock estate came under careful scrutiny to ensure no more secrets could harm the innocent. The girl left Willow Creek quietly, traveling east as the rancher had advised. She carried little with her. A small bundle of clothes, a few provisions, and the memory of a man who had risked everything to protect her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she would never forget the lesson of the plains. Courage, truth, and the willingness to stand for what's right could change the course of a life. The rancher returned to his spread, the dog at his side, the barn slowly returning to order. He moved through the daily work with a sense of quiet reflection. There were no celebrations, no fanfare. Out here, life was measured in horses fed, fences mended, and storms weathered. But he carried with him the knowledge that even in a town filled with secrets, even under the weight of lies and fear, the truth could still find its way. Maddox visited occasionally, checking in, now more cautious and measured in his approach to law and justice. He and the rancher shared few words, but there was a mutual respect, a silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. Both knew the town had changed, subtly perhaps, but indelibly. The girl's presence lingered in memory. The rancher often found himself glancing toward the horizon, imagining her journey, hoping she found the life she deserved. In the quiet moments, he reflected on the night of the storm, the river, and the confrontation, the choices made, the courage displayed, and the lives saved because someone refused to give in to fear. Weeks passed. The land healed, the river receded, and the ridges and pastures returned to their usual rhythms. Yet, there was a sense that Willow Creek had shifted, that the people who lived there would remember this story for years to come. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Standing for what's right required bravery, even when the odds were stacked against you, and protecting the innocent often demanded sacrifice and trust. The rancher continued his life as quietly as ever, tending the horses, repairing fences, and watching the horizon. But now, he carried a deeper understanding of the weight of responsibility, the complexity of human motives, and the value of truth in a world eager for easy lies. And sometimes, when the wind moved through the tall grasses or lightning split the sky far off in the distance, he remembered the night when the storm brought everything into focus, the night when a girl's innocence hung in the balance. A killer's lies were unveiled, and a small, quiet man stood tall against the shadows of greed and fear. In the end, the girl was safe. Justice had begun its course, and the rancher had learned once more that even in the harsh, unforgiving land of the late 1800s, courage and honesty could change everything. Willow Creek returned to its quiet rhythm, but the story lingered, a testament to the power of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the quiet strength of those willing to stand when others faltered. The plains stretched endlessly under the morning sun, alive with the promise of tomorrow, and somewhere beyond the ridge, the girl rode toward freedom, carrying with her the memory of a man who had frozen fear in place, faced down danger, and changed the course of her life forever. And the rancher, he watched her go, tipping his hat to the horizon, knowing that some battles ended not with glory, but with survival, trust, and the quiet knowledge that right had, at last, prevailed.